Welcome, everyone. Headlines here. The economy has dominated the general press as well as the legal trades. We've showing headlines here from the legal trades over the past couple of weeks. Slowdown, profitability rates, cuts, dominating, concern about how 2022 will end and what is coming in 2023. I'll give you a minute to take a look at the headlines. I'm Mark Klender. I'm a managing director in HBR Strategy and Operations practice. I will provide the beginning context for our webinar. Joining me today are my esteemed colleagues, Austin, Kevin, Sean, and Jamie. Each will cover their respective area when we get into our playbook for building stronger and dealing with the economic slowdown. The deck will be distributed after this webinar, and you'll be able to access everyone's bio by simply clicking on their name when you get that. Housekeeping. We are recording the presentation. Any questions or comments that you do provide will not be attributed. The only people you will see on this, because it's a presentation mode, will be the HBR members, myself, and our other presenters. You will all be as participants in listen-only mode. And again, questions will be anonymously submitted. We will try to take questions at the end, depending on the time that we have available. We will get back to you directly if we run out of time at the end and provide answers to your questions. And again, not only the deck, but the recording will be available. We'll send out a link to the event to everyone, and you'll be able to go on the HBR's website and access it. So today's discussion, we will start briefly with context about where we are today, 2022, cover the challenges ahead, and then we will spend the bulk of our time in this building stronger playbook. An inflection point. Taking stock. It's been 2 rough years of COVID. It looks to be on the wane. Just an unprecedented mix of challenges, which we'll cover here. But with those challenges have come opportunity, and we see leading firms seizing that opportunity to build capabilities and to get stronger as we move forward. Changing ways of work are at the core of everything. How we interact with our clients, how we serve each other, hybrid, literally a rippling effect across everything that we do. Caution, we are urging, and we'll go into this in more detail. This is not to deal with this recession, this economic slowdown. It's not using traditional countermeasures. Again, it's about leveraging change and playing offense. Next. So COVID, opportunities and challenges. This is this broader interplay, unprecedented interplay of dynamics. One of the toughest talent markets we've ever faced. Brutal. It seems to be taming, basically. The Fed has been aggressive, unlike we've ever seen it, in rate increases. We see another coming, not as large as the ones that we've seen so far. Corporate demand, more broadly, from our corporate law department survey, we're seeing mandates, 80%. We're seeing broader corporate mandates on cost reduction, and that will ripple down into their legal spend. Costs have been right through the roof, labor costs at the front, goods and services. Real estate is the right spot here, a favorable real estate market. And 2021 and 2022, beginning of 2022, profit like we've rarely ever seen before. The margin has been fantastic. but downward pressure we're seeing, we'll talk more about it, as well as going into 2023. So the numbers, we conduct a sounding board, HBR, of COOs on a quarterly basis. And we asked the COOs in the fall how they saw 2022 ending. Cautiously optimistic, about 40% saw them exceeding plan, 30% hitting plan, and about 30% off. The actual numbers now on the right, coming from Thomson Reuters, Citibank, and Wells Fargo, a challenging 22, the end of 2022. Demand down slightly, income down, expenses through the roof still, and profit per partner down substantially, almost 9%. These numbers are similar to what were at the end of 2022, or at the end of the second quarter of 2022. So moving forward, challenges ahead. Demand, we see downward demand still through 2022. The question is how strong and how long, and it varies by practice area. Rates have been the savior here on profitability, driving profitability, about a 6% increase through 2022. Target, we're reading in the industry 6 to 7 or 7 to 8%. The question is if the pushback from corporates, which we're hearing heavy now, if we'll be able to realize those. The war for talent, again, cost driving right through the roof across both legal roles as well as business support roles. We've listed some. 15% increase overall partner comp, midsize and large firms, over $1 million average comp in the mid and large segment. Layoffs, some. Question is how much. We don't see great recession type cuts. And finally, the Fed, how successful will it be in taming inflation across all the expenses that have started to kick back up in the office, travel, etc. Not a normal slowdown in the roots, the breadth, and the duration. We've listed here traditional recession playbook, activities in the boxes, peanut buttering, cuts and freezes in spending, in labor cost. We are cautioning to not take this defensive playbook. Be careful not to put yourself at competitive disadvantage as the economy returns and beyond. I'm particularly focused on talent retention, talent recruiting as the economy comes back. Long-term demographic trends in play. Same thing with culture, not to damage yourself. And of course, your marketplace reputation and your relationship with your clients. So building stronger, our playbook. Before we jump into it, we want to focus, and this is HBR's philosophy, is to focus on the client at the center. So for your law firms, the law firms on this webinar, focus on your clients, your client experience, a client-first mentality through the entire life cycle that you have with your clients, from developing business, building that relationship, to serving them, and then the feedback. Think about the client touch points, about the client experience for every action you take, the impact that you have. Our playbook today, offense and building capabilities to win, but at the same time, the combination, both individually and the combination of these offensive plays will substantially reduce your costs, not only short term, but resetting your cost structure at a sustainable way. Practice profitability. Sean, I'll turn it over to you to start. Thank you.
Great, excited to be up first and looking forward to talking about this. So one of the things that we find really interesting about the opportunity that we're confronted with is the fact that I think there's an expectation among most players in the market that there are going to be rate pressures, But that rate pressure and ultimately the demand pressure isn't going to be applied consistently across practices. The individual practice groups and practice areas are going to face different headwinds than others. We saw this both on the upswing, and I think we're going to also find this on the downswing. So what's going to ultimately, I think, happen is that rate increases that people are asking for in the coming year aren't going to be applied consistently, and that realized rates are actually going to be pretty significantly impacted by high volume practices. The other thing we're also noting, and I think that most firms really identify with and find, is that the profitability hits that people find in downturns aren't always applicable to every group that is associated with the firm. And so what happens is one approach, one mechanism to try to address these issues for an individual practice doesn't always apply particularly well. So the other piece to this, ultimately, in a world in which I think for the last several years, practitioners have been focused on trying to pull through as much work as possible, trying to get as much talent as possible to pull through the opportunities and the work that the market is providing. Now to switch a mentality back to, I think, what was probably more of a 2008, 2009 mentality of how do I do more with less? How do I operate more efficiently and effectively? How do I work with these rate pressures? All of that is ultimately going to kind of create a tension for practitioners, and that tension isn't going to be applied universally. So what we want to try to do is address those opportunities and those needs on a practice by practice basis, really look at how to solve that. So how do we do this, right? How would we recommend that you sort of take this and move forward? So the first idea is really to do a practice-specific, delivery-specific financial analysis of the work that is happening in an individual practice. I think we all have those practices within the firms that everybody knows is probably either performing with a lower profit margin than the rest of the firm. But the real question isn't, is it rates, is it realization, but more along the lines of diving into the individual specific aspects of that practice. How are each element of a particular matter being delivered? Are there certain aspects of the matter that are, or even phases within the matter that are being delivered differently? The next piece, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in just a second, is the idea of really looking for opportunities within that analysis to identify what we like to call bright spots and rising tides. So bright spots are this idea of saying, across the type of matters that we're doing, across this very specific type of work that's being done, is there a group, maybe an individual, maybe an office that is delivering the work that is within this practice area more efficiently and more effectively with a higher margin than the rest of the firm? And by doing this, by sort of focusing in on these bright spots, you can actually sort of look at each of the practices that you have associated with that are potentially being impacted by rate pressures, and try to get the rest of the group to sort of meet that bright spot, meet that opportunity. The second, when you go through these types of efforts, just to see, are there areas, very large tranches of work, often high volume work, sometimes 7-8 figures worth of work, that would benefit from small marginal improvements that increase the margin of that work over time. Next thing we recommend is to take those opportunities and to engage with a process improvement mindset, to try to really think about how to deliver that work more efficiently and more effectively, using and pulling on the levers of margin, whether that's staffing, whether that's working to improve realization. And then ultimately, you take those ideas and you implement them. So moving to kind of the next, and ultimately the goal here is to improve margin as we think about this as an overall aspect, not just to simply increase revenue, but really to try to take the same demand that we're seeing and increase the margin overall. So this is an example of how this works in practice, right? This is an example of looking at a whole slew of matters and seeing that there are certain circumstances where very similar matters might have, say, for example, the same level of realization, but very different margins. And so this would be an opportunity to say, if I were to try to make all the matters in this vertical to the very top of the area, I could improve the margin across very similar types of matters without fundamentally changing the nature of the work that's being done. Similarly, what we see when you do financial analysis like this is matters that may have a really similar set of profiles where you could potentially raise all of the matters up and increase the profitability for these matters in a way that would ultimately sort of get the net benefit for the entire group. So the last piece of this that I think is really important is that there are a million opportunities in a million different ways to deliver the service, or to deliver improvement and to try to attack these problems to improve profitability within a practice group. What we recommend is that firms really dive in and get hands-on with the practice groups to triage these opportunities and find where the amount of effort is going to provide the greatest impact. That means really sitting down, understanding the practice, getting a deep dive into what is out there and what possible elements could be at play to improve the potential profitability of this group, and then to take a step forward to really address those in a systematic way, rather than trying to take a real scattershot approach. You want to find the highest impact and the highest opportunity for these teams. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Austin, who's going to pick up from here on the next step of this the playbook.
Yeah, thanks, John. So another way firms are preparing for a potential economic downturn is by focusing on improving their billing and revenue cycle operations. Each year, HBR, we conduct a billing and revenue cycle study. This year alone, 35 AmLaw and global firms contributed, and what we found is one of the highest priorities was how firms can really optimize and improve their use of resources, their processes, and their technology related to billing and the revenue cycle. There are a lot of outcomes that can come from focusing on this. More satisfied attorneys, they're frustrated with billing issues, how much time they're spending on billing. That in itself, right, can lead to more revenue generation, finding ways to minimize how much partners and attorneys are spending on billing. Increased tech adoption, integration across tools, better analytics, another opportunity from this type of process. More consistent and automated processes, mitigated write-off leakage, fixing silos across the revenue cycle. Often we find that it's really a bifurcated process across groups and structure within a firm. And so finding ways to improve collaboration and communication across is often a key area of focus. And just overall, improving firm stakeholder satisfaction, client satisfaction, and leading to better revenue capture. As we know, especially this time of year, there's a lot of focus on collections. We know collections is taking longer and longer, and so firms are really focused on how can we improve what we can to make sure bills are getting in front of clients in a more timely fashion. And so really 3 ways that we're suggesting building a stronger playbook with regards to billing a revenue cycle. First off is finding ways to standardize and streamline processes, obviously enabled by technology. The second focus is how do you enforce and increase adoption of existing processes through some of the firm-wide policies that you look to implement and enforce. And then the third piece is refining roles and clarifying responsibilities, which can lead to optimized resourcing. So when we talk about the revenue cycle, we often look at the client matter lifecycle and the different impacts. Again, this is all client driven, as we said up front. The focus should be the clients. And so throughout the process, what are your interactions with the clients? And throughout this process, how is the billing and revenue cycle having an impact, and where can it be improved across this sort of life cycle here? So the first piece that I mentioned up front is how do we standardize and improve and automate our processes? Well, there are a number of ways firms are implementing tools to help throughout this process. The first is outside counsel guidelines, right? Again, how do we further align with the requirements that our clients are setting for us? Some firms have hundreds of guidelines in place, and so making sure that our bills and our time entries, that they're all aligning with what our clients are expecting, that's really a key area of focus. And year over year, we see it becomes even more of a focus. Another piece is time entry tools. How do we automate some of the time entry process, right? It's kind of a thorn for a lot of firms and attorneys. How do we improve this and make it better and compliant with our clients? And we've seen a lot of technology be implemented to help address that. Electronic performance tools, There's an increasing implementation of these types of tools, but also adoption continues to increase. A lot of firms initially had the tools, but adoption was pretty low. We found this year in our latest survey, 84% adoption rates for firms that are using pro forma tools. So really, really good adoption for firms that have implemented it. E-billing technology, almost 100% of the firms that we heard from this year in our survey said they have an e-billing tool, which continues to increase. Sort of the client perspective here, right? Law departments also, almost 90% of the law departments who participated in our law department survey this year said they have systems, but it hasn't been reflected in the revenue yet. Only 35% of firm revenue is being e-billed. So the tools are there, but there's still a shift that we're seeing from the traditional mailing to using e-billing technology. And then the last piece, analytics continues to be a focus when it comes to improving pricing, billing, or other finance-related processes. The next, again, the second component of building a stronger playbook related to the revenue cycle is really focusing on the policies and enforcement. There are a couple areas that we focused on when we looked at policies and deadlines. The first is timekeeping, right? What are the deadlines and how is our firm performing related to timekeeping practices? That continues to be an area of focus. And how are we incentivizing compliant timekeeping? A lot of firms are factoring it into their performance reviews, into bonuses. That tends to be a pretty consistent process. Pro forma deadlines is another area. On a monthly basis, most firms align somewhere around the 15th of the month, but what are firms doing to actually enforce that and encourage billing attorneys to get their pro formas back? So again, you can speed up the cycle and try to get that revenue in quicker. One thing we will call out is, regardless of the tactics you use to enforce these policies, it has to align with the firm culture. So it could be a carrot, it could be a stick, it could be financially driven or performance driven. It may work for one firm, but not the other, right? We find culture has a really big impact on what will work, what type of tactic will work well for your firm. And then the last point here is just what we have heard from firms is when they look to enforce, it has had a really big impact on the timeliness for their bills. It minimizes billing issues, and it's helped to reduce write-offs when they do put tactics and look to enforce those. One key point we wanted to highlight here sort of at the end of the slide is, again, the client is driving a lot of this. This year, 72% of firms said that they are allowing their clients to have real-time access to unbilled time. And so having really good timekeeping practices and accurate practices is becoming more of a focus for firms as clients are having additional insights into that information. The last piece here is around role clarity and using resources across the revenue cycle. We're seeing sort of a number of things when it comes to the use of resources. The first off is sort of the remote working. Most firms have a formal policy, whether it's hybrid, whether it's in the office every day, whether it's fully remote. About 60% of firms have a formal policy, but we find that actually 40% are still allowing flexibility to, again, remain competitive and say, you know what, if we need someone in one of our groups to be fully remote, we want to allow for that flexibility and not have a formal policy. Another thing we're seeing for firms to remain competitive is compensation adjustments within the revenue cycle staff. Most of the firms, upwards of 80%, saw adjustments to their compensation, and those firms said that it's led to an increased ability to retain and recruit top talent. So a lot of shifts there. Resources are becoming more specialized, focused on specific practices, specific practice groups, client needs. There's an increased focus in specialization of resources. And it's not just revenue cycle and billing staff, it's legal support staff. How are we involving support staff of the firm in the revenue cycle? They're doing more tasks, more focused on attorney support, like reviewing narratives, billing guidelines review and compliance checks, pre-bill review, et cetera. They're shifting away from actually client communications about invoices or distributing invoices, but legal support staff, over 95% of firms are using their support staff in this revenue cycle process. And then outsourcing. Most firms talk about it, but what we're seeing is few firms have actually started outsourcing it, but it is a consideration from every firm that we've heard from. Again, really big focus, especially this time of year as collections are slowing down. How can we improve our revenue cycle? So happy to share some of those insights with you. I'll flip it to Mark, who will talk about some of the support models that we're seeing.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. This is about who, how, and where work is done across legal and business support services. And this is really at its core making attorneys work easier and more effective. And this is taking an encompassing view across both legal and business support services. And again, that it's about attorneys, it's getting attorneys involved initially around what's working and what's not working and how COVID is impacting their world and what opportunities there are to make things better. Capabilities absolutely at the core, capabilities for the future around analytics, around things that the firm is not doing today. Alternative delivery can absolutely improve capabilities and lower cost. Combine the activities could reduce cost by 20 to 40%. Again, not only short term, but long term. And again, encompassing solutions really gets to virtual, combination of virtual, it gets to shared services, and it gets to third-party delivery. So here's an example on the legal support side of siloed approach, knowledge management, legal project management, research technology, et cetera. Going from that siloed view to a more multidisciplinary view that provides for innovation and impactful solutions. And it weaves in business and data intelligence and analytics and practice solutions, practice innovations to really be impactful and providing high value. On the alternative legal support side, this is from our survey of corporate legal departments, our 2022 survey. And you can see e-discovery at core, it's standard now, 95% of the companies using it. And then this next tier around contractor, staff augmentation, and document review. And you can see the other emerging areas here too. Again, these activities for the law firm mirror the use of outsourcing and external providers. Business support services. This, I'll orient you to the slide. On the left-hand side are the functions within business support services, and the percentages are the percentage of the work and the percentage of the roles that could be done through alternative delivery. And again, here, alternative delivery is defined as virtual, shared services, and third-party delivery. And we've listed here for each of these areas, the types of activities that could be done in alternative delivery. The percentages here in the column are up a good 25% from what we found working with clients pre-COVID. Jamie.
Thanks, Mark. So one important area when we talk about the more broadly reimagining the role of legal and business support services is the modernization of the legal administrative assistant or legal secretary role. This has been something that's been talked about for years, but it has really taken off through the course of the pandemic as the ways we have worked have changed and various drivers out in the market. There's really significant opportunity at this point in time that we're seeing being driven by a number of factors. So one is just the talent market for legal secretaries, LAAs. This has shrunk significantly over time. We're seeing fewer and fewer individuals going into their careers looking to be career legal secretaries. So we're having to think differently about the sustainability of this role. At the same time, we're seeing changed ways of working. So from our hybrid environment to newer generations of attorneys who are more familiar with technology, tech savvy, becoming more self-sufficient, support needs are changing. And then the final piece here, lots of work has been done in the past on cutting ratios, reducing numbers, but many firms have already taken that step. So the question is what's next? And the opportunity that we have, particularly looking forward, is thinking about designing a model that really taps into the best skilled resources for the job so that we're meeting those attorney support needs, but also delivering it in an efficient, cost-effective manner that's going to work for the future ways of working. In terms of how we do this, so actually operationalizing this opportunity, there's a couple components here. So one is looking at the reimagination of this role. So thinking about it not just as that traditional view of the all-in-one role of the legal secretary, but can we split that role out potentially into different types of skill sets so that we're acknowledging the different resources requirements that may help deliver those services more efficiently. As part of that process, in terms of getting to what that picture looks like, we recommend taking a look at what we call task disaggregation. And this is essentially looking at, in detail, the workload of your LAAs, how they're spending their time today, and how can we group different types of activities. Let's say the work they do on traditional administrative work, such as scheduling, expense reporting, the more complex work they may do around billing and BIs, and start to think about what are the interrelated skill sets that may lend themselves to breaking out and thinking about this role differently. The other piece of this is focusing on upskilling the talent you have today. From all the clients we've heard, very few are coming from the angle of this being a pure cost-cutting exercise, but are very focused on the service that's being delivered to the attorneys and how can we continue to increase, if not better, provide for their support needs. So thinking about creating consistencies across staff, breaking down some of those silos you have with individual attorney support, office-centric support, and thinking about what are the new skills and capabilities that you can bring into these new roles. The other few pieces that are at play in this transformation, so thinking about the underlying processes and technology supporting this role, instead of having your LAAs kind of work in silos with each of their attorneys, thinking about what are those best-in-class workflows that we can train and standardize across the organization to the extent possible, so that work is being done efficiently and within the lines of best practice. And then the final piece we're seeing here is part of this transformation, and this has really taken off, particularly in transformations through COVID, is this emphasis on workflow, technology, and resource management. As soon as LAAs went to a fully remote environment in the early phases of the pandemic, many firms came to HR, to different companies saying, we have no idea what our legal secretaries are doing, how can we get more transparency into that and understand how to better utilize this resource. So a number of firms tapping into intake workflow technology to help underpin some of the intake of those work assignments and how that's being managed and tracked in the new world of legal administrative assistant. The next bigger picture theme we're seeing at this time is thinking not just about the legal admin role in isolation, but really thinking about its connection to the other firm support functions. There are so many interrelated processes, roles, and responsibilities through things like billing, which Austin has touched upon earlier, intakes, conflicting, word processing, a lot of opportunities to think about what should your legal admins be doing versus these centralized functions, and how can we strengthen those two so that really the best skilled internal function is prepared to support a given task or activity. And then this final piece in terms of how we are seeing firms evolve in their thinking is focusing about that holistic support experience, what we had talked about at the outset, whether it's your clients or that are external or internal, thinking about all the different touches they are having with support, legal administrative assistance being included, and how can we start to create that seamless network. So evolving the LAA role is a very important foundational step in that, since they're so involved in the day-to-day of attorneys, but making sure we're touching the overlapping responsibilities and new ways of working with paralegal, business development, some of these other functions is critical to setting up for the longer term success and transformation of support services. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark for some perspective on real estate.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So real estate optimization, hybrid. It is here to stay in some form, as much as some firms are questioning it and how deeply and how long it should last. This is really about reducing and changing space use and reducing space overall, but also about making very effective use of the space that you have. We have leading clients that have been reducing their footprint overall by a good 30%. And with that and the realities of the market and rents, the cost structure dramatically impact here. This is really starting with the overall strategy from the firm at the firm level practice and functional strategies, rethinking ways of work, and then office space optimization, and then changing the policies and the use of the space. So this is a view of an overall real estate strategy and optimization. Again, on the left side, this is about determining how many roles, how many headcount need to be housed in your firm offices, starting at the top in firm strategy. But this whole service delivery strategy I talked about and virtual, the two of those could reduce your need to house folks in the office by well over 30 up to 40% reduction in those need to be housed there. On the right-hand side, we get to your current portfolio, the leases that you have today, and the markets that you choose to be in. And then the next two, work policies and programs and design standards, the ability to reduce space requirements by another 10 to 15%, marrying those together, the demand side and the supply side for a new office footprint. I wanted to show just through an illustration here in the next slide, how this all comes to play very simply. So your current portfolio example of the offices, the geographies that the firm has offices. I picked Denver, and I hope no one is on the call from Denver and takes offense to this. But this firm decides to close an office. The market's just not there. Let me now go through how this works overall with the illustration. So first, this idea of alternative delivery, moving things to shared services centralizing and moving them to lower cost location, third-party outsourcing delivery. Again, if you think about your average firm, a good 40% of the roles, not in practicing the law and attorneys, but between legal and business services support, reducing that footprint for those areas by about 50%, per the numbers I showed earlier. Layer in virtual, that is roles that do not need to be in the office and not housed in the office, a good percentage that are reduced from overall demand. And then finally, using policies, design standards, standardized offices, sharing, hoteling, different use of common spaces, reducing file space, etc., gives you a reduced need within your footprint, your remaining footprint requirements, and firms are using this as a growth buffer. And then overall, the last is applying this across the offices, not only to your headquarters location, but across all the office. And we get to this 35% plus reduction. Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Mark. This is our last section, and then hopefully have time for some Q&A. So vendor governance, in all encompassing term, inclusive of procurement, sourcing, the management of vendors. So why is it important? For a 35% margin firm, every dollar saved equates to $3 of revenue from the bottom line standpoint. 1, 2, vendors, they're skilled, they're trained. Their job is to increase revenue and margin. So they're good at doing that, and we're seeing that a lot right now as they with using inflation and passing on sizable increases to firms. So that's really why it's important. While the cost side is viewed as a defensive strategy, firms that have good visibility and good vendor data really allows them to take a proactive approach and be on the front foot ahead of vendors, putting them in a much better position. Looking at the slide, highlight 4 or 5 things. 1, vendor governance is becoming an imperative at a law firm. Protecting. Go to the prior slide. Sorry, Regina. Is really protecting the firm reputation and operational risk, and really it's the expectation of your clients. So that's one. Two, and then in times of economic headwinds, a good vendor governance program allows a proactive approach, which will make a significant impact. Being the first mover advantage, because again, we're seeing vendors always anchoring high with increases, and then firms then feel good going from a 10% increase to a 4%. They feel good about that. So vendors are skilled at doing that. Talking a little bit more about the playbook, managed program or not, obviously the first step is always to outline the goals and objectives of the firm. As we work with firms, every firm's kind of trying to solve different things in terms of which impacts, the strategy of the playbook. So is it to improve your working capital? Is it in your budget relief? Is it, sustainable cost savings? Is it better controls for decision making? So there's always obviously give and take with vendors on that, and we want to be fair to vendors. Service is very important within law firms. So trading things of unequal value. So if the strategy is we need to increase cash flow, how can you negotiate better payment terms, maybe in exchange for a longer agreement with a vendor, or if short-term cost relief or cost savings is important, some upfront incentives, retention bonus, again, maybe in exchange for an annual increase, on the out years. So the importance of just really understanding the goals and the objectives to set the strategy. Second is obviously to understand and have good visibility of your vendor spend and contractual commitments. Having centralization of this information is obviously key, along with focus and the right skill set. The ability to segment and categorize your spend to align to the best strategy for each area. So, segmenting your spend into, what's fixed versus variable, recurring versus one time, taking your technology spend, understanding how much is software versus telecom, knowing who your top 100 vendors are, and do you have contracts in place with those. So finally, just the outcome of a managed proactive program, based on our experience, would be 10 to 20% of savings based on your vendor spend, while reducing firm risk. So why invest? So this is a visual of a managed versus unmanaged program, based on our experience. Won't go through all the detailed assumptions, just to say, we see with unmanaged programs, typically experience 2 to 3%, and right now, it's probably higher in terms of increases when you're not actively monitoring this, versus a proactive managed program focused on getting in front of it, sourcing, demand management. Is there rationalization opportunities? Do you need to align the new contract better with what you're actually buying? Will have a significant impact. This model is saying, for a firm that has about 140 million of third-party spend, you could save $7 to $8 million over a 3-4 year period just by having a managed program. So just some select specific recession planning strategies that we've seen be effective. Executive sponsorship is always key to success. Just looking at the list, kind of touched on the first two, on the prior slides. I mean, I think I'll highlight the two in the middle, just the contractual flexibility, how important that is right now. All these agreements are typically always on vendor paper. So the importance to build in business terms to protect the firm, given the unknowns, around termination for convenience, business change clauses, what have you, protect yourself on increases. So just the importance of really understanding and negotiating those business terms. And then the fiscal accountability. One firm just recently created a process for any net new buy or sizable renewal, has to come through, a process with a small committee, to ensure the due diligence, and there's a little bit of a business case on the why, the need for the renewal or the net new buy. And they also, include, diversity into it too. Is there opportunities with this renewal to look at, diverse vendors? So that's the fiscal accountability piece. And then just this last slide is just illustrative for when we send the materials, a little bit more detail on our, recession planning playbook. So just talks a little about the segmentation and proactive planning.
Great, thanks, Kevin, and thanks everybody for going over your various plays. We'll open it up for questions from anyone in the audience, and please use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Yep, I'm monitoring. Thank you. Again, any questions overall on the program, on what we shared at the beginning, or any of the specific plays? All right, I've got a couple of questions here now. One, if you're a managing partner, how would you prioritize the plays? Let me take that. We've ordered the plays from revenue impacting, top line impacting, bottom line impacting. Again, the first couple around profitability and capture, billing, etc. That will help you on the amount of revenue coming in and the profitability on those. The other two that followed were really around delivery and getting far more effective delivery, including some pretty dramatic impacts from alternative delivery, both on cost as well as improving service lines. And then real estate, a big opportunity just across the entire footprint. And as Kevin described, the procurement, sourcing, procurement, and vendor management, a good cost savings, and all sustainable. Another question: have you considered the trend of increased monitoring enforcement of outside counsel timekeeping? This is from corporate clients. Austin, you want to take that?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things there. It's both on the outside counsel guidelines front, but also what we're seeing from, again, that statistic that almost 3/4 of firms are allowing for increased monitoring. So again, the reaction we've seen from firms is, how do we make sure that our processes for timekeeping are automated? How do we make sure that we have narrative standards either across the firm or with individual practice areas, right? Getting some of the cleanup done in a more timely fashion so that you can allow for clients to have access and benefit from being able to have real-time access to some of that. Because again, the billing process can take 30 to 50 days. And so clients often do not have the visibility that they're looking for in a real-time manner. So we do suggest firms, where possible, looking to do what they can to align with that client demand. And then again, so that's the time entry piece. And then on the outside counsel guidelines, it's really about how do we make sure we're tracking clients, specific terms. What tools do we have in place to make sure that we're summarizing and distributing it to the relevant timekeepers? It's really critical that communication on both the timekeeping and the outside counsel guidelines to the relevant people is a key area of focus. So I'm sure others HBR, people may have insights on this one as well.
Sean, here's a question for you. How did practices typically react to the things that you're proposing?
It's a good question. I think initially, lawyers are a little bit skeptical, as always, to kind of have people come into their practices and tell them that they need to change what they're doing. But I think the right answer to this is to come at it with empathy and to come at it with an understanding and knowledge of the practice, and use the ability to sort of relate to people on a very detailed level as to the specific actions that somebody takes, and talk about it in terms of sort of rising tides benefiting everybody, often marrying up opportunities to improve the workflows and just improve the pace of life for the people that are working, in addition to getting benefits for the profitability. Really sort of smooths over, I think, any waves as far as kind of coming in with particular practice optimization. But it does take a really important sort of change management and messaging approach to go in and say, we need to talk, here's how we propose moving forward. But the alternative is unfortunately kind of tough conversations behind the scenes with individual lawyers or teams. And we really want to try to avoid that and keep teams together and keep the culture and the fabric of the firm together by really focusing on ways to bring those groups up to the rest of their peers, or at least as close as possible.
Thank you. Jamie, question for you. How do you deal with the broad range of experiences and intergenerational differences between partners, attorneys, those that are newer associates, etc., when you attack LAAs?
Yep, that's a great question. It's something that we hear often with firms who deal with this issue. I would say first and foremost, part of it when firms are undertaking this initiative is studying the unique needs of your attorneys and speaking with them, whether it's through kind of working sessions to segment out some of those differences. Obviously, there's commonalities across the market, but uniqueness to each firm. But I would say more broadly, we are seeing, particularly with newer associates, the easier kind of quick win opportunity to implement more change or newer change with the model, introducing different types of more limited support resources or more technology-backed support, because it's naturally more familiar to them and they're not accustomed to some of the longer term high touch support that are received by partners. So thinking about segmenting that out in the model, as well as in terms of a phased rollout approach, firms are certainly taking that into consideration.
Thanks. So question for me on the outsourcing marketplace. How have we seen it? Have we seen it develop over time? I'll take that and throw it out to others in respective areas. I will go back a good decade here of the outsourcing marketplace being very thin for the law firm segment, and coming from a broader consulting background pre-HBR, the big players, IT, finance focused, had not really dropped down into the law firm space. I do now see, particularly around point solutions or specializations, the market be far more matured, both in their offerings and their capabilities, as well as their geographic reach. Others in your particular areas around the outsourcing marketplace, Austin, you started to touch on it. How do you see the provider landscape?
Yeah, again, we've seen there's a lot of focus on the revenue cycle to think through, hey, billing, e-billing, collections, are these the types of areas that we can outsource? And almost all firms we meet with or hear from, they want to consider outsourcing, but we haven't seen much traction yet, and there are very few providers available to date. So again, something we're paying a lot of attention to and looking for year-over-year trends, but not a lot of stickiness on the outsourcing for the revenue cycle and billing functions to date.
Okay. Another question here more broadly, and I'll throw this out to any of our presenters. What are some of the more effective carrots and sticks you've seen law firms use? And again, for example, Sean talked to what you've been talking about.
So, I mean, there's lots of little sort of tricks you can do in terms of, potentially financial incentives or potentially ways of kind of getting people to move forward one way or the other, holding back things like client matter numbers, all these different things you can kind of work through to solve for. But my general experience has been, and I know this is a little softer than I think most people are used to, but really building cohorts around things that you want to try to solve for, and allowing peers to sort of self-monitor each other in terms of what the expectations are, whether that is something like time entry compliance and putting people into buckets together to say, as a team, we are going to try to have time entry compliance at 95 or 98%. Or things like, as a practice group, sort of in my example, we're going to all try to meet a particular goal or a particular benchmark. Those types of activities tend to be more effective in my experience than trying to sort of incentivize individual actions based on sort of a positive or negative reaction. I think it's the peer cohorts and the peer sort of growth that really changes people's mindset and behavior to a kind of a one firm approach. So at least that's my quick 2 cents on that.
Yeah, Kevin, would you take that question too? I mean, this is about governance, right, and changing behaviors where there might not have been controls, but how do you deal with carrots and sticks?
Yeah, it definitely is a good question. Every firm's a little different. I would say setting a goal, having it be a firm-wide goal versus it feeling like you're picking on individual departments. So building consensus firm-wide to goals and objectives.
I'll just add to that, Mark. One thing we've seen in the revenue cycle space is it depends on the audience. It tends to be that firms find partners respond more to performance reviews or making certain lists or different things of that, whereas associates are the stakeholders that find the financial implications to be the most impactful. So that's sort of a nuance we've seen within our space as well.
Great, thank you. Well, we are at the top of the hours. I would like to thank everyone who has attended this and also thank our speakers. As I mentioned, we will be making the presentation as well as the video recording available to you after. We will get a communication out to you directly.